The town of Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine has become the latest all-out battleground between invading Russian forces and Ukrainian defenders. Russia has made capturing the shattered town a priority at a pivotal time in the war, which has now lasted nearly 2 years.
This is what's left of Avdiivka, once a city of 32,000 people. Nothing but rubble and destruction now. Yet Ukrainian defenders are dug in here. Russia has lost many soldiers trying to cut off access to the ruined city in relentless attacks. And it's still in Ukrainian hands despite recent Russian advances. They haven't been able to bring in serious numbers of troops. They had some success, but the street they took is again under Ukraine's control. We're pushing them out. But why does Russia want Avdiivka so badly? Almost 2 years into the war, the front line has largely frozen. Taking Avdiivka would change that for Russia. The city is also in the Donetsk region, which Russia considers to be its own territory after its parliament voted to annex it. The invader also says that Ukraine uses Avdiivka to shell Donetsk city just 15 kilometers to the south. Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken of Avdiivka in unusually detailed terms, making it clear that the city is a priority for him. One of the most important directions where the fighting is ongoing, in Avdiivka. A group of veterans overtook our troops there and got ahead of them. They broke through the enemy's defenses and reached the outskirts of Avdiivka. They captured 19 houses and are holding them successfully. Capturing 19 houses might not seem worthy of the attention of the Russian president, but it's a clue to how badly Putin wants a victory. Analysts say that taking Avdiivka won't dramatically reshape the conflict, like the battle for the city of Bakhmut last year, in which both sides lost thousands of soldiers, fighting over rubble, looking for a symbolic victory. But ultimately for Ukraine, it's about keeping its own territory, despite the price, while Russia does everything it can to take it.
Joining me now is Nico Lange, who is in Munich. He's a political analyst and senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference, and he also focuses on transatlantic defence and security at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Thanks so much for your time. The battle for Avdiivka is using up a lot of artillery, a lot of manpower. Can you help us understand why it's so important that Ukraine holds on to this town? And do you think it can?
Well, Avdiivka has a symbolic meaning, very much like Bakhmut did some time ago. And now it's about proving the point for Russia that it can still take cities and territory. And for Ukraine, it's about the question whether holding Avdiivka and administering losses to the Russian side will help them in their defense. I suspect, though, that the question whether to stay in Avdiivka or to leave it and shorten the front lines might have been part of the conflict between General Zaluzhny and President Zelensky that ended with General Syrski now being in charge.
So you've just mentioned it. Volodymyr Zelensky has overhauled his military leadership recently. What impact is this likely to have on the ground?
What we see is an approval of the position the president had not to give up any territory voluntarily, not even for the military reason, for example, to shorten the front line because of a lack of resources. New, fresh Ukrainian forces have been brought into Avdiivka, so Ukraine will continue to try to hold the city as long as possible, giving as much as losses as possible to the Russian side. But of course, Avdiivka has been under pressure from three sides for quite some time now. Russia is entering the city, so it's a very intense situation. And one of the reasons why Ukraine is in this bad situation is, of course, that we as the partners of Ukraine were too slow in producing and delivering enough artillery ammunition.
Looking further ahead, what do these changes in the Ukrainian military tell us about Ukraine's future military strategy?
for now, I think it's very difficult to think about long-term strategies for the Ukrainian armed forces. But at least for this year, it seems to be that there's a divided front line. So in the east, Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Marinka, Donetsk, Bakhmut, Ukraine will try to have some kind of flexible defense, holding the line, but not every meter, but somehow holding the line and giving losses to the Russian side as much as possible, maybe delaying the Russian operation in the east. While in the south, Ukraine, with the use of drones, with the use of cruise missiles, with the use of modern technologies, will try to put pressure on the Russian armed forces, maybe put more pressure on Crimea. In the creative ways, the Ukrainians did this successfully to maybe achieve something there. But I think on both fronts, in the south and in the east, for Ukraine, this will be a very, very difficult year.
Nico Lange, thanks so much for your time and for your analysis.
Thank you.
For more, let's bring in Marina, a military analyst at the War Studies Department at King's College London. She joins us now from Helsinki. Hi, Marina. Could you tell us, please, about the current state of the battle for Avdiivka and why Russia is investing so much in the fight for this city?
Good evening, Anya. Well, we have to understand that Avdiivka has a strategic importance for the Russians. On the one hand, of course, they claim that the Ukrainian forces have been shelling Donetsk from Avdiivka. So it's been a problem since 2014 when the Ukrainian forces started reinforcing Avdiivka, turning it effectively into a fortress. Back then, the separatist groups were trying to take Avdiivka unsuccessfully. So this has been going on for a while. And the reason why it has a geostrategic importance for the Russians is because it's easily defendable, and there are key highways, would mean that it will be easier for the Russians to develop an offensive towards Slaviansk and Kramatorsk. Now they have one piece of the puzzle is Bakhmut, which they can use as a springboard, and the second would be then Avdiivka, which again they would use to develop those offensives further west. And of course, as I said, it has become very symbolic for the Russians as well to get the Ukrainians out of arguably one of the most fortified cities. But the situation for the Ukrainians now is not looking very good because apparently the Russian forces managed to almost surround, it's a tactical surroundment of the southern part of Avdiivka. So it remains to be seen how long the Ukrainians, given the shortage of artillery shells, can hold their positions and can defend Avdiivka.
We are soon approaching the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As it stands now, will this war be won militarily?
Well, it's difficult to say because we don't know what is going to happen, and it depends on many factors. What does a military victory would look like? We have to think of some scenarios. For instance, for Ukraine, it wouldn't be acceptable to admit defeat. Now, the Ukraine supporters, European countries, the United States and the United Kingdom, they don't really have a plan per se what this military victory would look like for either side. And the goals outlined by Ukraine to retake all the territories and go back to the borders of 1991, which would include Crimea as well, seems very unrealistic given the situation. I think what might happen is probably a stalemate if Ukraine doesn't receive any more help or any more substantial help, which will help it to fend off the Russian advances. And we also have to think about the change in command. General Syrskyi might have a different approach from what General Zaluzhny had. We also have to think about the mobilization law, which is becoming very unpopular. So Ukraine is suffering not only from ammunition shortages, but also it's affecting the morale of the troops as well as the number of capable troops who can fight on the battlefield. So all those factors could possibly signify that there might be some sort of a stalemate at some point where there will have to be a diplomatic solution to this.
The US Senate has passed a bill granting another $60 billion in aid to Ukraine. The House of Representatives has to vote on that now. Can you give us a sense of what difference would getting that money or not getting it make to Ukraine?
Well, we have to understand that the United States, now talking not as a percentage of their GDP, has been the major provider of military aid to Ukraine, meaning that if the United States were not the House of Representatives who were to turn down that bill, Ukraine would suffer greatly because the European countries with their sluggish defense industry simply cannot fill the gap. That means that for Ukraine, even if there are pledges to provide more ammunition and more military aid in general, this will be taking years. And time is of essence, specifically time on the tactical level, which runs very fast, and Ukraine needs that aid now. If the United States were, the House of Representatives were to pass that bill, indeed, it would provide a portion of help to Ukraine, but again, Ukraine needs long-term support. So that short-term injection of funds will certainly help Ukraine militarily, but it will not dramatically change the situation if we don't know how this will unfold in the future. And with upcoming US presidential elections, there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of any help to Ukraine, Israel, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Marina, you mentioned European countries' sluggish defence industry. The head of the German arms manufacturer, Rheinmetall, says Europe needs another 3 to 5 years to replenish its ammunition stocks, 10 years before it's really ready to face an aggressor. What does that tell us about Europe's capability of supporting Ukraine or even defending itself if the US is out of the equation?
We just have to look at numbers in terms of production. What Russia produces, even in terms of artillery shells, I think it's upping to about 4.5 million shells a year. That is much more than what the European countries can produce altogether. And there were talks about 20,000, 40,000 shells a month. So in terms of capabilities, Russia seems to be outgunning Europe quite literally. And even the United States doesn't have that production capacity. And especially for Europe, what is important to understand is that every country, because these countries are democratic, they have the say in how the defense spending is allocated and to what industries, meaning that Europe has uneven development when it comes to defense spending and when it comes to priorities and even when it comes to threat perception. We also have to understand that Europe is also dependent on a commercial production market, and there is not as much support in Europe for arms manufacturers as, let's say, in the United States. And that means that European governments will be placing orders to companies like Rheinmetall, and they will be waiting in a long queue until these orders can be fulfilled. And again, we have to think about the global supply chain, which is also driving the prices up. And so the prices for artillery shells has quadrupled, meaning that firstly, there needs to be more money. Secondly, it is taking time. And thirdly, NATO's own stocks need to be replenished, which brings me to the point that I don't think that Europe at this stage is in any position to offer long-term support to Ukraine in the quantities that Ukraine requires it.
Marina, thanks as ever for your analysis. That's Marina Miron from King's College London.